As you might know by now, Trump was convicted of the Manhattan hush money case. We all know that by now, probably. Trump was convicted after about 12 hours of deliberations, and as you can see, it has probably grabbed the headline of every single news story. But Trump has been convicted. It's it's quite an interesting phenomenon in terms of the fact that this has never happened in U.S. history before. So it's quite historic by every measure. What we see is that pretty much when we look at this, Trump conviction, 34 counts of related to hush money, which is 34 counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. What this conviction means is that the jury ultimately believed that Trump paid this quote unquote hush money to pretty much benefit his 2016 election campaign. The jury had three different theories they could accept or reject. The first thing is that he pretty much second degree hush money. Paying hush money simply means that he paid hush money, essentially that he falsified these business records. To elevate this to a first degree felony, which is what Trump has been convicted of, you need one of three things. Number one is that he committed falsified business records on top of falsifying business records. Like, I just don't understand what that means. The second thing is that he pretty much committed fraud due to the fact that he paid this quote unquote hush money, but he actually paid more than what he was supposed to, which is also an interesting version of tax fraud. The third thing is that, and what the state was going on, is the paying hush money in violation of the pretty much the Election Interference Act or something like that, which says that you cannot pretty much pay money to help or benefit your election campaign. It makes more sense that the jury chose the third thing. They did not have to all choose everything. They did not have to all even consent on this one single element, as long as the jury agreed that one of these elements were present, at least one of these elements were present out of the three, then Trump could be convicted of first degree falsifying of business records. And that was what the jury did. Now, he could still end up running for president. There's no US law that can pretty much stop a presidential candidate from running for president because they were convicted of falsifying business records. But will that benefit or hurt Trump? We don't really know. I personally don't. I'm not very sure. Right? We look at the current polling. I'm just going to go to national. We don't see that Trump has been significantly hindered because he was convicted. The polling still suggests that Trump is up by 1.7%. And in general, it looks okay for Donald Trump as of right now. We see that all these national polls have Trump ahead. This one is simply for New York, which is weird. Yeah, we see that all these polls still have Trump ahead right now. Wait, did I not present? Yeah, I just realized I didn't present. Okay. I was just talking about the guilty verdicts. You see these convictions here, 34 counts. Although he was convicted on 34 counts and each individual count gives him up to 4 years, Trump could only be sentenced to up to 4 years in prison because of the fact that these counts were related to a similar act, which means the judge will run them concurrently. I don't think Trump is going to prison. He is a former president at the end of the day. It's unlikely a former president will be sentenced to prison because of a crime like this, which is still the second degree crime would have been a misdemeanor. The jury found Trump guilty of the first degree crime, which is a felony. But at the end of the day, I don't think Judge Merchan's going to send Donald Trump to prison because the former President Trump, he is still a former president, and that this crime is not necessarily super serious. Sure, Michael Cohen went to prison for this, but he also faced other charges. What happens next? We don't really know. Trump has promised to appeal, which is unsurprising. I don't think his appeal will actually go anywhere. Really, again, a New York court will probably not overturn his appeal. First of all, it is a more liberal court in general. And the second thing, Trump doesn't have as many grounds to appeal on. This is compared to all the other cases, this is quite a weak case compared to some of the other crimes that Trump was charged with. But at the end of the day, it's still a criminal conviction for a former president. Is there any news y'all want me to analyze? Type it in the chat. Also, uh, I'm not particularly I personally was not confident at all that the jury was gonna hand down a guilty verdict against Trump. I felt like the jury was probably going to be deadlocked, but because when I looked at the jury composition, I thought it made sense that they would be deadlocked. I'm just gonna look at the chat. I can't actually see it from StreamYard, but I'm gonna still look at it. I'm just looking at the chat. I looked at a New York video of people yelling back and forth between Trump supporters and anti-Trump advocates, I guess. Yeah, pretty much that. Quite sad of the division in this country. Absolutely true. People are sad. I'm very much, pretty much infuriated by the fact that there's so much hatred going in the country right now. Again, looking at this, Trump was convicted, 34 counts. It's well, I guess it's a sad thing for America that a president would be convicted. I'm not sure if he's gonna end up how this would actually impact the election. There are two sides to this type of story. The first is that Trump will be benefited by the fact that people will sympathize with the with the quote unquote weak person, the weaker candidate that was someone who was bullied by an unjust system, as Trump will portray it. Or you could argue that this will help the Democrats because, again, a majority of Americans think that criminal charges itself disqualify someone from running for president, and more think that a criminal conviction would disqualify him. Um, I'm just looking at the comments. The division is sad. Definitely. We look at a, this could impact undecided voters swing to Biden. Again, just like the sides I analyzed there, it's difficult to say right now if these undecided voters will end up going backing for Trump or Biden because of the criminal counts. On one side, they don't want someone who has been criminally convicted. On the other side, I really don't know because of the fact that even though Trump has been criminally convicted, these charges are not necessarily the most serious. Trump is not going to go to prison most likely for this, and that voters, again, many voters will see this as unjust, even not not even unjust, but they will feel sympathy for Trump because they don't think that Trump deserves to go to prison for this. I don't think Judge Merchan will give Trump prison time, but still, that's a distinct possibility at this moment in time. But how would that impact the general election? We don't we don't know right now. We need more polling data. We need more. What do you guys think will end up happening after the Trump conviction? Because I personally am not sure. On one side, again, it's that Trump being convicted will damage his reputation with independents. On the other side, it could actually benefit Trump in terms of his voters' turnout. because again, more people will turn out for Trump if they feel like Trump is being targeted and that entire system is unfair. And just looking at all this. Is there anything y'all want me to go through? I mean, I don't know what to go through at this point. If you just look at the polls here, Joe Biden still remains unpopular. It's going to be interesting to see how Trump's approval rating is impacted by the guilty verdict. I personally am not sure. I feel like more people will say they disapprove of him because of the conviction, but at the same time, that might not hinder Trump at the same time. I say you should make a video on how this will impact the electorate. I will make a video about how this impacts the electorate because this is a significant issue that has pretty much plagued the United States. Char says world country, depends on how you look at this, right? You look at the American justice system. This was held in New York, which means that more people would be sympathetic against would be unsupportive of Donald Trump, so to speak. But at the same time, you look at this, right? It's still the people. If look, if Trump was someone who was just a ordinary person, charges could have been filed many years ago. But if you look at the fact that Joe Biden, who has also mishandled classified documents and still and was not charged with anything, then you can say that Trump was, not handled in the same way as Biden. But if you look at the fact that Trump was actually, the Trump charges, it came after, for example, in the classified documents case, it came after the prosecutor said, hand the documents back. Trump said no, and that's why they charged him. Right, right. It depends on your interpretation of that. I personally think that if Trump was an ordinary citizen, that he would have been charged a long time ago, not necessarily just this year. Personally, I don't know much. Again, I think that, however, the Manhattan case was indeed quite weak compared to some of the other cases. The theory on this charge is a bit shaky. On the charges is a bit shaky at best, and perhaps weak at worst. If you look at Tracy deals here, this is pretty much the map, right? This was what was essentially charged. Karen McDougal, that's like cooperate. It's like kind of cooperating with the prosecution. David Pecker testified from the National Enquirer because Michael Cohen cooperated with him. I thought the jury was going home for the day. They did say the jury was going to go home for a day, and then they found Trump guilty. I believe 4:20 Eastern time, the jury said they were going to go back for the day at 4:30, but pretty much they got a slight extension. By 4:42, the jury said they reached a unanimous verdict. They said they needed half an hour to fill the verdict forms. They filled it in. The jury found Trump guilty. Right when I was following this live, I thought that the jury was just going to go home. We're going to have to wait another day. I personally thought that the verdict, it was either going to come tomorrow or the jury would say that they're deadlocked tomorrow. But the jury found Trump guilty. The verdict, what could happen next? That is something we're going to have to talk about. I'm going to be looking at the New York Times updates. Alvin Bragg, his expression is somber, his eyes a bit red, his draw team files behind him. I don't know what is super emotional about this on Alvin Bragg's part, to be honest. It's still his guilty verdict. True Social's stocks apparently fell by as much as 14% after the guilty verdict. That's interesting. You look at the fact Do you guys think Trump is guilty? Because I know that there are Republicans who think Trump is guilty, and I know there are Democrats who think Trump is innocent, at least in this case. How much do you think the fine will be? I think that the judge will hit him relatively hard with the fine. Again, because number one, because some people they could serve prison time because of these charges, and so a fine could be insignificant compared to 4 years in prison. Number two, Trump is a rich person. Although a judge is not theoretically supposed to consider that, Trump has already been sanctioned by the same judge for about $1,400 for a remark he made. And the fact is, Trump is still wealthier, which means the judge could hit him harder with the fine. I've heard that the fine will be quite substantial for an ordinary person because, again, Trump is quite rich, so a fine for him doesn't really matter that much, at least in his eyes. Any other issues that y'all want me to discuss? In terms of how this will impact the electorate, I do want to discuss it. So, in terms of how this guilty verdict will actually impact the election, it's quite interesting. So, Republicans, I think, will actually back Trump at a greater rate because that's what we saw with the Republican primary. I'm just going to show you the Republican primary polling. Um, GOP primary polling. If we look at the Republican primary polling here, Trump skyrocketed after the criminal charges. You see these bumps; these were all bumps caused as a result of Trump's being charged in different areas. Biden is going to monopolize on this so hard. I think it depends on if Biden's team feels like this is a good issue to win voters on. I personally don't think it's a good issue to win voters on this type of thing because of the fact that it's gonna pretty much unite the Republican Party. We're going to see that again, some independents might be straight to go for Biden because they don't want a convicted person to be in office. But at the same time, I do believe that a lot of these voters could end up being slightly swayed to actually go for Trump because they feel bad for him or they're just not going to vote. Now, previously would have reluctantly voted for Joe Biden. See this graph, and it's very telling. When did Trump have the surges? Right, he had the first surge over here. That was, I believe, around this was a big surge, right? Trump was at 46% at this moment in time, and then he increased to 53%. That was because of one of his criminal charges being filed. Presidential generic, though, it still looks pretty doomed for Biden. We look at all the competitive states, right? We look at everything, it doesn't look too good for Biden. Still, however, we have to look at how this pans out for the Democrats and Donald Trump. I personally don't think it looks too good for Trump, but I personally don't actually think it's going to benefit Joe Biden, but we'll have to wait and see. I think these convictions, they don't really they don't really do too much either way. Is there any questions in the chat? I'm more than willing to answer all of them. Just type it in. You don't have to send a super chat, no, nothing. Just type in your questions. I'll try and answer them. What happens next? Key players. I feel like the New York Times summons it quite well. I can't watch live because I'll get copyrighted. This is also an interesting topic. If Trump goes to prison, the Secret Service will follow him in prison. They're going to ensure that pretty much no one can do harm to a former president. The former president Donald Trump will likely face either probation or prison time, though probation is significantly more likely. I don't think Trump will go to prison for this, but if he is convicted on any of the other charges, I do believe that he will go to prison at that time. You look at this, uh, right? Trump could go to prison. The Secret Service would have to follow him. The verdict. I don't know what to cover at this point. Yeah, Trump's sentencing is July 11th. We look at just the fact that Trump was convicted on all counts. That is significant for a lot of reasons. That is significant for a lot of reasons because of the fact that, again, a former president being convicted is not something to be taken lightly. Elections analysis and prediction, that's crazy. It is. A conviction for a former president is crazy by all standards. Riley Flam, let's go, dude. Thank you. We look at the updates. I'm still waiting for more updates, personally. On the verdict, what happens next? The former president's. I mean, what is Trump going to do after this? I think Trump will personally start selling a bunch of his, items, and he's going to retail some of them. He's going to sell more of those "Make America Great Again" hats, and he's probably going to raise more money for his general election campaign. I'm when I look at I'm also going to be analyzing at this point. I'm just going to be analyzing some of the election results, some of the Republican primary results. I know I spelled it wrong. I'm going to be analyzing some election results at this point. The Texas primary runoff happened just, I believe, 3 days ago. 2 days ago. Right? Some of the more interesting ones. First off, can't wait to see how this will affect the polls. Just like I've discussed, I don't really know how this will affect the polls. It's probably going to be Republicans being more consolidated on Donald Trump, and Democrats pretty much, and independents maybe slightly swaying towards Democrats because of this, because they don't like Biden, but they don't want someone who's criminally convicted on the world stage. I really don't know at this point. And that because this is still a political stream, I'm going to be looking at some election results, really. This just happened about 2 days ago. This is the runoff election primaries in the state of Texas. One of the interesting ones was this one. Tony Gonzalez and Brandon Herrera in Texas's 23rd congressional district. This was a very close primary, decided by just over 1 percentage point. What really made the difference here, Tony Gonzalez won Bexar County, which is where San Antonio is located, the suburbs around San Antonio. He got 54%, Brandon Herrera got 46%. This made all the difference between Tony Gonzalez and Brandon Herrera. Tony Gonzalez might have easily lost the Republican primary if it wasn't for San Antonio. This was quite an interesting map. If you look at Tony Gonzalez is a more moderate candidate, and Brandon Herrera is a much more, conservative Trump-aligned figure, someone who more or less resembles like Laura Boebert or something like that. And what we saw was that Bexar County produced about half the votes. They went for Gonzalez. The other counties weren't enough to sway it in favor of Medina County. Wait, which one is that? I believe, yeah, Medina County. That was the second largest vote producing county in the state, and then Uvalde County. So at the end of the day, Tony Gonzalez was able to win re-election. Now, the reason this close margin was interesting to me was because in the primary results, at the first round at least, Tony Gonzalez got 45% of the vote, was forced to run off, but still got 45%, right? On the Republican side. And Brandon Herrera only got 25%. But I guess that the Trump sentiment really helped Brandon Herrera, and the fact that Trump supporters are more, energetic to go out and vote. Right, Dan Crenshaw was someone who faced a challenge for his political life. He was able to win re-election, but still, right, that was a relatively close race, just a 13,000 vote difference. Now, Keith Self, I believe this was an interesting race because just 2 years ago, Keith Self was able to primary out the pretty much he and the Republican incumbent was forced to a runoff, and the Republican incumbent dropped out because Trump would have endorsed Keith Self, and that was an interesting primary to end up watching. We look at some of the other races, though, it doesn't really matter as much. Now, this one is also interesting. Jay Furman and Lazago Garza Jr. The reason this is interesting in my eyes is because of the fact that this race could be competitive, because Henry Cuellar has been indicted. The incumbent Democrat from this district, Henry Cuellar, is the last remaining anti-abortion Democrat in the entire state. And why is that interesting? 2022 House. I'm just going to show you something. I want the New York Times one. Yep. So Texas. I'm going to show you the state representatives. Cuellar wins. Why is this interesting? Because Henry Cuellar is a very, very popular Democrat in his home state, in his home district. He did not do well in the San Antonio area. You can see the shift, right? This is the largest county by far in the state. But look at all these other counties, right? Zapata County, Henry Cuellar won it by 47 points. It went to Donald Trump. Starr County, Cuellar got a 41% margin. Look at the 2020 presidential margin, right? Henry Cuellar did so well. Webb County, 18-point shift towards Henry Cuellar. This was a district that I believe Trump was able to win. And then if you look at this, it's just astounding by every measure. Even something like McConnell County, which is this very red county, it still had a 23% shift towards Henry Cuellar. Right, that's quite an interesting storyline in my opinion. So, however, again, Henry Cuellar has been indicted, so he might not opt again, and so you could see Jay Furman being the next representative in the 28th district, although I think his constituency will reflect him, even though he has been indicted, personally. And some of these, they don't really matter because a Republican is not going to win in Dallas. Just look at that. State legislators, state senate. The state legislature is in pretty big trouble. We see a lot of runoffs. It's interesting because this one, you can actually click on this one. I don't know why that is the case. Interesting. Presidential Texas primary. I'm also going to be looking at some of the primary results previously on Super Tuesday. Right? What we see is that the reason I'm looking at this is because you need to see how well Trump and Biden is able to consolidate their support. And what we see is that, again, Biden is suffering loss in Hispanics. We look at a random county like Starr County, right? Joe Biden only got 45% of the vote there. That's not a good look. That county shifted like 55. I believe Starr County was the county that shifted 55 points away from from Biden compared to Clinton in 2016. Right, Zapata County, Biden got 40% of the vote here. Right, even in a county like Webb, which is more populated, Joe Biden only got 66% of the vote there. Malvern County, Dimmitt County, right? These are all hugely Hispanic counties. Lafayette County, right? Hugely Hispanic counties. Joe Biden performed very poorly in some of those counties. Cumbersome County, Reeves County, right? Loving County, this doesn't really matter. It had one vote there. And what we see is that in closed primaries, Trump did particularly well. Trump got 80% of the vote in California, which is interesting. Taking the stand might have been better for Trump. I mean, personally, I don't think he values the criminal conviction that much. That's my perspective, anyways. Taking a stand, I mean, the people's interpretation of Trump, he could have said something that was unprepared, that was somewhat incriminating, and that he didn't want to make any omissions. If Trump just clashed with the state, it would have looked bad for him. But if he was too defensive, that wouldn't resonate with his supporters. I think he made the right choice not to take the stand, because personally, I don't think he really cares about the criminal conviction that much. He cared much more about his civil case. I know he looked defeated when he pretty much exited the courthouse, but I felt like the criminal acquittal was not his top priority. I think that really portraying that he was a victim of an unfair prosecution was much more his intended purpose. We go to California, you see the fact that Trump was able to do very well in a closed primary. Trump got more than 60% in every single county in California because it was a closed primary. How Republicans voted, right? Uh, Haley got one win in Super Tuesday in Vermont, and that was because Democrats were voting for her. That's it. Really, Nikki Haley's appeal resonates with largely independents and also Democrats. I'm kind of tired at this point. You just look at the fact that again, Trump's appeal largely stands with more moderate voters. No, Trump's appeal is more like Tea Party conservatives, even like Jellicoe voters. Nikki Haley's appeal was just pretty much independents. My next primary would be the Montana primary, but that's still in a couple days. This would be interesting a primary election to end up streaming, but because those are the final four primaries. You just look at the criminal conviction; it's historic, right? All I can say is that is a hugely historic conviction for a former president of the United States. I personally don't think Trump would taking a stand would have been too good for him. I'm just looking at so the live updates from the New York Times here. The Secret Service will go for it with him. Yeah, I've seen that before. Donald Trump became the first felon American president. It's not that significant of a felony. If the jury went with the lesser charge of falsifying business records in the second degree, it would have actually been a misdemeanor. Also, if you have been here for quite long, please consider subscribing to my YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Yeah. Do I have anything more to say? I really don't. We look at, I think what made the difference in this case was Michael Cohen's testimony, as well as the collaborating ones. For example, David Pecker, I believe that out of the four things the jury requested, three of them were something to do with David Pecker. Anyways, I'm gonna end this live stream now because I really don't think there are any significant things to go with. If there is anything last minute, please just any questions last minute, you can type in a chat. I'm gonna leave when this says 35. Unless of course there are some other questions. I personally think this guilt I what do I think about the guilty verdict? I think again two interpretations. Number one, the Trump interpretation would be this was a two-tier justice system where he was below President Biden because Biden was not charged with the classified documents, but Trump was. But if you look at it from another perspective, in the Democrats' perspective, this was something that was long overdue. Trump could have been charged several years ago, and that he wasn't. and the fact that January 6th occurred, and that he was charged after all the insurrectionists, or at least what the Supreme Court deemed as insurrectionists, that is another issue to discuss. Anyways, I don't think there are any more questions at this point, so I'm just going to end this live stream. Thanks for watching, especially if you were here for the entire time. Thank you.